Let's build this sleek piece of UI together. As you can see, this is an animated navbar, a picker navbar. As I click on one of the elements, a little ball appears and it fills up the SVG, and I can freely switch around however much I want. This requires HTML, CSS, and vanilla JavaScript, which we'll be writing together, and grab the source code from the description down below. There will be starter files that you'll be needing to work along. So with that, let's get started. So here we have 3 initial files that you'll be finding in our repo: the index.html, a style.css, and the JavaScript file. It's completely empty. In the CSS we have some colors set up, they will be needed for that Glassmorphism effect. And in our HTML you have a bunch of stuff. The main thing is that we'll be working in this div. We have our CSS linked up, but we also do have an SVG tag in which inside there are multiple icons. These are the active and deactive icons that you saw me toggling when I was switching the navbar, and these are imported from this URL. You can find these online and you can add multiple of these to extend your UI, but just copy paste this, you won't be having to worry about any of this. Now getting started, I will first of all give this div a class name icon-holder, and then I'll remove this comment, and inside that create another div with the class icon. This will be an individual icon like you saw we are using those SVGs. Inside that, create an input field. This input field will have the ID icon1. It's important that you tag each of them individually with an individual ID. It will have a name icon and it will be of type radio. By default, this one, the first one, will be checked. The reason we are using radio buttons is because from JavaScript we can then manipulate whenever something is checked, and then a different piece of CSS will be applied to checked elements and unchecked elements. Below that, we'll be creating a new label for icon1. This is the ID of our icon. And then inside that, there will be an SVG. This SVG, the first one will be using the deactivated SVG. You can find this down below in the SVG tag. And the second one will be using the active version of that. Give them a separate class like icon deactive and icon active. And basically this is our HTML. Now all we have to do is copy and paste this 4 more times, or how many times you want, and give them a different class name. As you can see, I copy pasted these over. And each of them have a different ID, like icon 1, icon 2, icon 3 over here, and icon 4. And each of them are referring to different uses, different SVGs, because as I said, unfortunately, you have to manually extend this if you want different icons to appear. Since you have access to the source code, that's why I'm speeding up the process and doing it like this. And below these, we will create 2 more divs. These 2 will be one with the class indicator and one with the indicator drop. I call this indicator because this will indicate which one is currently picked or selected. And the drop will only be required so that we have that little ball animation at the end. With this we are done with our HTML, and you should be seeing something like this on the left hand side. Let's move on to our CSS. In our CSS you can see that we have this root element, and inside that there are colors defined. You can change them from this place and you'll be able to manage your CSS and change around the colors. This is why it's easily set up. And please take note of the transparency that some of the colors have, because they are required so that you have the Glassmorphism effect. The first thing that I like to do is implement this star, meaning we are selecting all the elements and we are setting their box sizing to be border box. This will mean that their width will be calculated along with their border, so it will be calculated into it. And we reset the margin and the padding on all the elements. The next selector will be the body. I'd like to say display flex, this will enable flexbox for us, and I say justify content center, which will enable us to center our elements, and align items center, which will enable us to center our elements vertically. Also next in the body, give a linear gradient, and this linear gradient will be referring to the page background 1 and page background 2. With the var keyword, you are able to refer to these up in the root. And then just give a simple width and height to your body. I prefer to use the percentages instead of the viewport width. but you can do whatever you'd like here. And the next selector will be our icon holder, meaning the one that holds together all the items. It will have a position of relative because it will hold absolutely positioned elements, and if you put absolute elements inside the relative one, the relative will pull them together and it will act as their parent element. It will use flexbox to align everything in a row and make sure to put the space around the elements. This is the horizontal axis, and on the vertical axis we are simply centering them. Now give this holder a width and height. This is up to you, but these are the right proportions for me. Also give this holder a border radius to round it a little bit, and then we'll be applying a little bit of background changes. I'll explain as I go along. The first one is going to be a simple background, but this is going to be a little frosted because as you see the opacity is dragged down and this is a grayish color. There will be a backdrop filter of blur 15 pixel. This will give you the Glassmorphic blur, and we'll do the same with the WebKit backdrop filter so it works on multiple browsers. I simply gave a grayish border to this one and then applied a little bit of box shadow. This box shadow is needed so it highlights it a little bit and it looks neater. That's all we did for this icon holder. But as you see, our icons are still very large, they don't even fit into the screen. So let's work on those. Let's grab the icon selector, give them a width and height of your liking, I choose 50 pixels, and then enable flexbox for them. This will align them yet again in a row and center them horizontally and vertically. Now they are all visible. Now it's time to work on their label. Whenever you hover over them, I'd like them to have a cursor of pointer. If you remember, the label, if you open up the icon, is over here. And inside that, there will be the SVG, meaning we'll be able to click this little label and it will do something for us. It will check our input field as well. Give them a width and height of 100%. And also enable flexbox here and horizontally center them. As you see, now they fit into this little icon holder. All we have left is to properly space these out and remove these radio buttons. The next selector will be the SVG selector because we have SVG icons. So I will be setting their width to 40 pixels and their position to be relative because I'd like to be able to move them around later. With this, the object gets centered, and the next one is going to be our SVG icon deactive, meaning the deactivated icon. All I'm doing here is setting the field to be the white one and the stroke to be the white one as well. We're displaying it inline and giving it a little bit of width and height. And as for the next one, it's going to be the input and the use icon active, so whenever something is active, it will be displayed as none, display none. And this will make sure our elements are now actually how they are supposed to look. Because we've disabled the active elements. They are all deactivated right now. Now the next selector is going to be a little tricky. As you see, we are selecting the input when checked. And also with the plus sign, we are saying that it's a sibling element, meaning the inside the label, inside the SVG, the use where it has the icon active class. So this element will be applied these classes whenever the icon is checked or the input is checked. It says the transform origin to be centered and it gives a little bit of animation. We'll be creating these animations later on, but make sure to include these. The animation fill mode will be set to forwards. This will mean that once the animation is over, it won't reset, it will stay like that in place. And its display will be block because we've set it to none before, and its fill mode will be set to none. The reason we won't be able to try this out yet is because we are not yet manipulating it from JavaScript. One thing we will be able to try though is the next selector. Whenever you hover over the label, we apply an animation which is yet again not yet created, and the animation fill mode will be forwards yet again. What does this mean? It means that once the animation is over, it will stay like that. Now the next selector is going to be the indicator. This indicator is going to be of position absolute, meaning I'll be able to set the top, left, right and bottom positions however I want. There will be some magic numbers given for its width and height, and a border radius of 50% to round it. It will be positioned on the top 78 pixels, and it will have a transition set, so it transitions smoothly, and it will also have a little more border radius settings. This border radius setting will override the default one whenever it's possible, and this will give it a little bit of a strange shape. Its transform origin will be set to center on the x-axis, and on the y-axis it will be a little shifted by 20 pixels. We'll be creating a separate class called indicator animation. It won't be creating the animation yet, so we'll have to test this later. The next one is going to be a before element for the indicator. As you see, it already appeared over there. This is going to have a content of none, because this is a requirement for before elements, but I don't want it to have a content. It will have a position of absolute, so I can position it freely, and it will have a border right and the border radius given. This border right is what you see appear over there, and it will be rotated a little bit and given some magic numbers over here, so it resembles the shape that I showed you over here. This is how the indicator will look like. As for its after element, it will be almost the same, it's just the opposite direction. If I save, you can see that it appeared in the opposite direction. Next, as I said, there will be an indicator drop, whose position is also going to be absolute. It's going to have an equal width and height, because I want this to actually be a little circle. Its border radius is going to be 50%, and it's going to have a background color of white, and it will be hidden by default, but if I show it to you, there you have it. This is your little dot. I don't know if it's visible enough. So I just put the opacity back. This will be needed because yet again, we'll be manipulating this heavily from JavaScript. Now all that's left is to create our animations. The first animation is going to be our fill animation. For this, create the keyframes, and it will go from a circle to a different type of shape. If you actually try this out, you can already see that it filled it up. And the reason it's going to be a circle is because I want it to fill it all together. It will just get clipped down, as the shape is not going to be a circle shape. Its fill will be set, meaning it will have a white background as it gets filled up. If I start clicking on these, you'll be able to see that this animation is actually applied. So we're actually halfway there. The next animation is going to be a scale animation. The scale animation, as you might have guessed it, is going to do nothing but scale the element. This is the hover animation. And as for the third one, is going to be a scale indicator animation. The scale indicator animation is going to scale the indicator on the y-axis and on the x-axis, and then scale them down, up and down basically on the y and down on the x. I hope you could follow along. The reason I did it this way is because why would you want to watch me code when you can do that yourself in your own free time? In our JavaScript, we'll start off by getting multiple elements, references to multiple elements. These elements are going to be with the query selector, the .icon class, the .indicator, and the .indicator drop. We'll be manipulating these one by one. I'll also create a variable called previous active label. We have to keep count of this, and by default it's going to be null, because we will track who was the last one who got activated, and then we'll be manipulating according to that. I'll put the comments that you can see in the finished code over here as well. Next, we'll create a function, and it will be the initialize indicator position. Inside that, this function will be called by default. This will initialize our little indicator to be set to the first element. I'll grab our label, our currently active label by default, which will be the active icon label, and it will be set to the document.querySelector. And remember, you can select like this with CSS, and with CSS we selected the input that was checked plus the label. Or if this element doesn't exist, then we grab the icons zero indexed element, meaning the first one. If this only happens if someone forgot to add the active to this class list, and we are query selecting from there the label. So now that we have that active icon label, which is currently the home icon, we can position it. From this active icon label, I'll destructure some of its properties, like the offset left, and the offset width. These will be needed and they will be from the active icon label. You can also access this by just saving active icon label and dot, and it will bring you up the variables. But I don't want to do that. I'd rather just store them with this syntax. First of all, I set the indicators.style.transition to be none. This is needed because otherwise if I was to on start move around everything, it would animate, and I don't want it to animate. Whenever the page loads, I want it to snap there immediately. Next we'll be setting the indicator.style.left. Because the indicator is an absolutely position element, we can move it around. Now put some backticks, and inside that put a dollar and then curly braces. And we'll be doing some calculations, but after the curly braces, put pixels, meaning the end of whatever we calculate will be in pixels. The way we are going to be calculated is going to seem like a little bit of magic, but it's not. We are going to add together the offset left, offset width, which I mistyped later, so pay attention to that, dividing it by 2, and then subtracting the indicator.offset width and dividing that by 2. So we can actually log these out so you see what's going on. First of all, the offset left and the offset width. And then as a second console log, I'll print out the indicator.style.left. And make sure to call this function up above. Initialize indicator position. If I bring up the developer tools, in the meanwhile, you can also see that this got positioned properly. The offset left is 12 and the offset width is 50. Now the calculations we are doing is that we are grabbing the left side and adding 25 to it, which is the half of the offset width, and then subtracting the indicators and then subtracting half of the indicators width from it, and then that will be represented in 26 pixels. The reason I set it up like this, so it can be dynamic, so you can resize it and it will be more robust. It will probably work like a charm. Now I remove the console logs we had here. The next thing that we'll be typing out, or actually I will be copy pasting because I'm too lazy to type it out, is going to be the active icon label. We select with the query selector inside the active icon label the SVG that has the active class, and then we add the class list to it. It will be the fill animation start, meaning if I refresh, it will start to fill up. As you see, yet again, if I refresh, it starts from an empty one and then it goes into a fully filled one. And the next one I did from JavaScript, but we'll be trying this out in CSS live now because I think it can be solved in CSS, is we are simply setting the background color of the indicator to be this RGB color. But I can simply grab this and go onto our CSS and search for the indicator and set its background color to be this RGB color. And then this shouldn't be causing us any problems. So if I comment this out, it still works. It works regardless. We won't be able to move it now, of course, but it doesn't matter. We don't have to set it initially. I leave it as a comment over here though. And while we are inside this function, as the last thing that I like to do is set a timeout. The set timeout function will execute after a certain amount of time, but this way we are not giving it time, we are just waiting for all the processes to finish, and then immediately after that we want to set back the transition, because what if the user keeps clicking and it's still waiting, then it won't be responsive. I mean, it won't animate. That's why, since it's an asynchronous operation, it will wait for all the other tasks in the main thread to be finished, then it jumps back into the call stack and it will get executed. Next we'll be creating another function. This will be our last function, which will be the update indicator position. We'll do what we did before. We are going to get the checked label. So we're going to get the currently active label. And if there is not a currently active label, or if the currently active label is equal to the previously active label, then we are simply going to return. We don't want to execute if we didn't find one, or if it's not equal to the previously active one, because the previously active one is going to be the one that we've initialized. Otherwise, if we've checked these and we found the currently active label, then we'll set the previously active label to that active label. What we need to do then is get its dimensions as we did before, because we'd like to get the pointer position or the indicator position and then move it to the next indicator. So to do those magic calculations, this will be our base calculation. Indicator.style.left will be set to the updated one. This is the same calculation as we calculated the indicator position before. So if you want to refactor, you can refactor this. Then I'll add an animation class to the indicator because this is needed so we can animate it and move it around. And make sure to set a set timeout. This set timeout will be set like this. So we remove after 300 milliseconds the same animation that we gave. Meanwhile, just so we can start testing, what I'll do is give a click event to all of the icons. To do that, after we initialize the indicator position, I'll call a for each loop on the icons, meaning we iterate over each icon, and we add an event listener of type click, and I'll assign the update indicator position to them, meaning the indicator position will get executed if we click. Now, if you have a look, indicator position changes and it gets calculated. The last thing that I'd like to do is that if this little ball icon, that if I click it, that little ball will shoot into them like it would fill them up. For that, we'll be creating a set timeout, and this set timeout is going to be 300 milliseconds, the same as the animation duration. The first thing that I like to do is initialize the position of the ball. This is going to be, yet again, some calculations, but not only that, we are setting the transition to be none because, as I said, I want it to snap there, to teleport there instantly. Then we are setting the transform to be a little elevated on the y-axis upside. Then I'm setting the opacity to 1 because by default in our CSS it's of opacity 0. And then I'm calculating its position. If I start testing now and click on this, you can see that there is the little ball icon appearing. Now we have to do another set timeout, and this set timeout is going to be 50 milliseconds so that it ends before the actual animation triggers. For this we'll be manipulating the ball. What I'll do is set a cubic Bezier transition. This is a type of transition that's more smooth and an opacity transition of 0.4 second easing out, just so it's animated smoothly. And then where you set the style on the translate y-axis to be 0, and then what I'll also do is set its opacity to be 0, meaning we actually disable it, we hide it, and then we'll be able to reveal it. And then while still inside the 50 millisecond one, we'll trigger an animation. The icon's fill animation will be triggered. And with this, we are done with our JavaScript. Let's test this out. If I click on either of these, you can see that the indicator moves, the little ball appears, and then disappears after 50 milliseconds as the animation of the fill animation starts. As you see, it's working perfectly. So with this, our little navbar widget is done. I hope you liked it, and I hope you put it to good use. If you found value in this video and would like to see more or something is not clear, make sure to comment down below and give us a like, maybe even subscribe. Other than that, I hope to see you in the next one. Happy coding and God bless.